Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Program Teacher Certification class. Whether you're here at the Peaceful Solution headquarters or you're standing in your home, you can please be seated. We're going to be picking up in the self-control unit. We'll be on page 61 tonight. I'm sorry, 60. If you don't have a book, you can, if you're watching over Facebook, you can go ahead and click on the tab there, where at the top where it says download the manual. And if you click that little tab, you'll see a few books there. We're in the Self-Control Teacher's Manual tonight. We've been covering chapter 3 of this self-control manual. Chris was the last teacher. And we got to page 60. We've been covering control your anger, which is a really, I think, one of the most central chapters in all of the peaceful, and in fact, I think it is probably the center of, if you look at all the manuals in the intermediate series, it's probably right in the middle of all 5 of those. I think it's the centerpiece of the program because we need to learn, really all of this combined is learning how to control, the emotions, especially the emotion of anger. As we learned in chapter 2, we went over certain emotions like anger, rage, love, jealousy, because those are the ones that are probably the most misunderstood, and probably people experience them more than most emotions. But I think anger is the most misunderstood emotion there is. And the Peaceful Solution actually, I'll tell you, it really helps to define what anger is. And it busts all the myths about anger and how, people make us angry, and et cetera, et cetera. It destroys all those and demolishes all those myths concerning anger in our minds, so we can learn that, hey, we are in control. We can control our anger. We can control all of our emotions if we're educated and we practice the things that we're learning here tonight. So I want to first go over to page, no, I don't want to do that yet. Let's go ahead and let's put up that first slide, do a little review here. This is from page 31 in our book, if you want to turn there. If not, you can just look at the slide here. It tells us, under the negative emotions, remember it says negative uncontrolled emotions are the problem. Anger in itself is not a problem. It's uncontrolled anger. When we don't learn to control the emotion of anger, that it can become a problem, not only for ourselves, but others around us, because our actions are going to affect those in our environment. Not only ourselves, but property, right? Because people destroy property when they're angry as well. But let's look at the anger here. It says, anger is a strong feeling of displeasure, resentment, or hostility. And so what we have here is some definitions, because we can't assume, again, you're dealing with junior high students, right? By the time they get to this book, they might be in the 8th grade. Their vocabulary, most adults don't know, couldn't really, if you asked them to define displeasure, resentment, or hostility, they might not know how. Okay, so we can't assume that these young people know these definitions, so we've got to break it down for them. And as teachers, we need to be writing in our manual these definitions so we also can pass that on to the children of what these mean in depth. So let's look at displeasure. It says displeasure is a feeling of annoyance or disapproval. Okay? It's where you feel annoyed or you disapprove of something. The word resentment means bitter indignation at having been treated unfairly. Whether you've been actually mistreated unfairly, or whether you're imagining you've been mistreated unfairly. Sometimes disrespect is imagined. It's not always real. And We'll learn about that in coming classes when we get to the respect manual. I don't want to jump ahead. And then there's hostility. Hostility means hostile behavior, unfriendliness, or opposition. So we feel anger when we feel like we oppose something, like we're against something, like we feel strongly against a certain thing. Okay, and we're going to learn more about that tonight when we get into the part about why we get angry. So I don't want to jump ahead, but I hope you wrote down these definitions. Again, displeasure, a feeling of annoyance or disapproval. Resentment is bitter indignation at having been treated unfairly. And hostility is hostile behavior, unfriendliness, or opposition. Remember, this is the definition of anger found on page 31. Let's go to the next slide. We're doing a review of the last class. When I think about this is on page 59. When I think about the many faces of anger, actually, that's the wrong slide. Can we go to the next slide and we'll come back to this one? I didn't mean to get you hungry. I don't know about you, but I like hot, spicy food. So, okay. But let's look at page 58 first. Facts about anger that Chris went over. We learned that no one ever makes you angry. You choose to become angry. That's a big wake-up call for most people, because most people don't believe, what do you mean no one makes me angry? Somebody just made me angry a little while ago. What do you mean they didn't make me angry? What they said or what they did made me angry. Well, as we're learning, you became angry, but your anger was a result of not controlling your first emotion, because we learned that, anger is a secondary emotion. That means that you don't get angry first. You usually feel another emotion before you become angry. And because you didn't control your thoughts at that point, you can start having angry thoughts, and that can turn to anger, of course. So no one makes us angry. We choose to become angry. And we learn that anger is a secondary emotion, as I just said. And we learned that anger that is uncontrolled can turn to rage. Now, let me hit on this second point about anger being a secondary emotion. It's if you think about it like this. You're driving down the road, okay? And a car cuts in front of you. They cut you off in traffic. And you think you're going to slam into the back of the car. Right? They startle you and you think that you're going to slam into the back of that car. How do you feel at that second? Do you feel angry? Or do you feel fear? Yeah, you're afraid. You feel fear, right? Because you think your life is in danger, or your car's going to get smashed, or you're going to smash into someone else's car, right? So you're not angry at that second. You're fearful. You're afraid. You feel the emotion of fear. Now, remember, anger can seem instantaneous, but once you figure out, wait a minute, okay, I didn't get angry when that car cut in front of me. I was afraid. I felt fear. Well, then what occurs once you realize you're not going to hit the car? You start having thoughts like, well, it can go either way. Remember, it depends on what you think at that point. You can think, that's stupid, rotten, dumb. This is a family-friendly show, right? You know what you can be thinking at that point, right? If you're having these angry thoughts, you're fueling the anger by your thoughts. You're fueling and justifying your choice to become angry at that point. Now, what I started practicing doing, and I started this a long time ago, and believe me, I was living in Houston, Texas at the time. There's a lot of traffic, and there's a lot of horrible drivers, including, well, I guess they thought I was too, but I thought I was the best driver out there. But I was a defensive driver because everybody else around me didn't know how to drive. Only I knew how to drive, right? Well, I got rid of that pride too. I didn't really know how to drive that well either, but nonetheless, I was a defensive driver. Well, what I started doing, instead of getting angry when somebody would do something like not use their blinker or cut me off, or, some other, thing that you do when you're driving that you shouldn't do, was I would start practicing saying in my mind something like, if that person took the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, I thought he'd probably use his blinker and not think it's not a big deal. He'd probably follow rules a little better. Or it's possible that that person that just cut me off is having a seizure, or they're reaching in their glove box and they're getting something and they weren't really paying attention. They didn't see me. And as we're going to learn later tonight, a lot of things that are done to us, we take them personally. We think that somebody did it to get at us, or they did it because they don't like us, or they're trying to disrespect us in some way. But really, it's all in our mind. It's not really so. How do we know what that driver's thinking that cuts us off in traffic? We don't know what's going on, but we shouldn't take it personally. But people do, and it takes place? Something we're going to learn about. It's called road rage, right? People get seriously hurt, and people get killed, murdered, because of road rage, because people don't control the emotion of anger, okay? So remember, you don't get angry first. You never get angry first. You have another emotion like annoyance or fear or jealousy or something else. And because you allow the angry thoughts to continue in your mind without stopping them, because let's say they do start in your mind. Let's say you start feeling like, stupid, what. You can cut it off. You can recognize that, hey, wait a minute, that's not going to solve the problem, me getting angry about this. And you can start having you can replace the negative thoughts with positive thoughts, as we're going to learn later on in the chapter about how we can deal with anger, different ways of dealing with anger. So I don't want to jump ahead again, but I do want you to get it in your mind that we have the ability to control these emotions. And once it's broken down like this, in a very simple way, the Peaceful Solution breaks it down, you can once you're aware of these things, like we're showing you right here, it's going to be easier for you to recall when you're in a situation that, hey, wait a minute, I'm in control of how I feel about this situation. I can't let the other person control me like a puppet on a string. We can't control what other people do, right? We can only control how we respond to what other people do or say, okay? Okay, so remember on page 58 at the bottom, it says, we create our own anger by the way we think, our attitude, and our choices. Now let's go back to the hot sauce. This is on page 59. Chris covered this as well, that anger can come in many different forms. And there's mild anger and intense anger. That's why I like to compare them to hot sauce, because, you have mild, which I can't stand. I have to put cayenne pepper in it, real and mix it in there, because I got to have hot sauce. That's why they call it hot sauce, people. It's supposed to be hot. I've even had Spanish friends of mine, that they say, man, that's hot. And I'm like, really? It's hot? I'm from Alaska. So, but I do like hot stuff. But you have different faces of anger. You have the resentment, which is the feeling of indignant displeasure or persistent ill will at real or imagined wrong. That means it's something that you've been carrying for a while. Okay, it's persistent, meaning that it takes place constant. It's been something that's going on in your mind constantly. At real or imagined wrong. Sometimes someone didn't really do something. We just think they did. Okay, and Chris gave us some examples about that. And then there's outrage, which is an act of violence and brutality, anger and resentment aroused by insult or injury. Someone says something to us that's insulting, or they injure us with words, or possibly even with physically, or they injure our property, okay? And then there's fury. Remember, Plymouth used to make a car called Fury, right? But fury is a person's violent temper, intense, disordered, and often destructive rage. See, these are different forms of anger, but these are not acceptable. Okay, let me just tell you. That's why it says hot. Okay, this is hot. This should never come. This should never be in our minds should never be inflamed with this right here. Any of this. This is not the appropriate way to deal with anger, okay? In any way, shape, or form. Destructive rage. Okay, so wrath is strong, vengeful anger or indignation. And then rage is a violent and uncontrolled anger, intensely and openly displayed, yelling, screaming, kicking, breaking things. I'm sure we've all, I know when I was younger, I had my moments breaking things, but I'll tell you what, after I broke it, when I realized I had to fix it or I had to pay for it, it was like, why did I do that? That was the stupidest thing I could have done. But I always thought at that time, because I didn't know what I know now, that I had to do that. Like, you had to do that. Like, okay, well, it's natural to break your mirror or put your hole through that sheetrock or whatever, put your hand through the sheetrock with your fist. It's normal, that's how you react because, someone did something that justified my want to put my fist through that mirror, right? Somebody made me angry, right? Wrong. But that's what I thought because I didn't know. Okay, so let's go now to pick up on, first of all, let's go to the lesson plan. And we're going to be looking at we're going to be looking at step 3 on LP3F, LP3D, step number 3, where it says, have students read Anger Can Hurt on page 60 and do the exercises. Hey, that's pretty simple, right? That's probably the shortest instruction I've ever seen. So all we have to do is go to page 60 and read the story. Okay, so let's go over to page 60 here. That's called Anger Can Hurt. And it says, learning to control your anger is one of the most important skills you can learn. What? Wait a minute. This must be a misprint. It says it's a skill? I thought plumbing was a skill, or being an electrician was a skill, or cooking was a skill, landscaping was a skill, or, what? Controlling your anger is a skill? Hey, guess what that means? It means you got to go to school. It means you got to learn it. Right? If it's a skill, are we born with a skill? Nope. You're not born with a skill. Now you're born with certain abilities that come through genetics, as we learned in the character unit when we went over genetics, that we have certain traits in us that were passed on genetically by our parents. But guess what? Let's say your dad was a rock and roll guitarist, and he passed that gene on to you. Well, would you ever know if you could play a guitar if no one ever gave you one? Would you know you had the ability? No. Not unless someone gives you the guitar, they give you the opportunity, they give you the teaching, the training, how to do it. Then hey, I can actually do this. And you're pretty well at it because your father was well at it or your mother was well at it, okay? Well, guess what? I want all world leaders that are watching tonight, all teachers, everybody to understand that anger management is a skill. Controlling your anger is a skill. Just like any other skill you have to go to school to learn, to trade school or some other special school, you've got to go and you have to learn it, which you guys are here doing right now. Okay, so anger that is uncontrolled has the potential of causing harm to yourself and others that sometimes cannot be repaired, which we're going to learn here. in this story called Anger Can Hurt, where it says, read the following short story about one young boy's experience with anger. Then answer the questions that follow. So let's put up the slide so we can look at the visual as we're reading this story. There was a little boy with a bad temper. His father gave him a bag of nails and told him that every time he lost his temper to hammer a nail in the back fence. The first day, the boy drove 37 nails into the fence. Then it gradually dwindled down. He discovered it was easier to control his temper than drive those nails into the fence. Finally, the day came when the father suggested that the boy now pull out one nail for every day that he was able to control his temper. The days passed, and the young boy was finally able to tell his father that all the nails were gone. The father took his son by the hand and led him to the fence. He said, "You have done well, my son, but look at the holes in the fence. The fence will never be the same. When you say things in anger, they leave scars just like the ones in the fence. If you hurt someone in anger, it won't matter how many times you say, 'I'm sorry,' the wounds will still be there." Okay? So I think this is an awesome lesson in us understanding that, yes, forgiveness is a positive character trait. We need to forgive others when they do things to us, no matter what they do. Remember, we have no option but to forgive, because if we don't forgive and we hold on to these things, there's going to be consequences for us. We're not going to hurt the other person that we don't forgive. It's not hurting them. But remember, holding on to resentment and grudges, I believe we read, it's like drinking a glass of poison. Hanging on to grudges or resentment is like drinking a glass of poison and waiting for the person that you're angry or resentful at to die. Who are we really hurting? So even though we need to forgive, do we have the ability, when somebody forgives us, can they just erase what you said out of their mind or what you did out of their mind? Do they have that ability to take an eraser and just like a chalkboard and just erase it out of their mind? No, they don't. There's still scars left by what we do. There's still consequences that person has to suffer and that we have to suffer as a result of what we do. We can't ever think that we get away with it scot-free. That's not how it operates. There's consequences that we have to live with sometimes the rest of our lives for choices that we make. All choices have consequences, and all choices have rewards if it's the right choice. Now, it says, have you ever said or done something in anger that you later regretted? You don't have to raise your hand or anything, but think about this. Have you ever said or done something in anger that you later regretted? And I think we could all say yes, because I think we all agreed when Chris was here, we all got angry at some point in our lives, or 1,000 points in our lives. Some of us 10,000 times in our life, right? Okay. I want to illustrate something else, because there's something else we do with students in the Peaceful Solution to illustrate this even more in their mind, to help them to understand that when we say or do things when we're angry, first of all, we need to be careful when we're starting to feel angry, which we're going to learn about as we proceed in the chapter about anger, triggers, and cues, etc. But once we start feeling that anger come on, that's our cue right there that we better watch our tongue, because once the bullet leaves the chamber, so to speak, can you take it back? Once the words come off the tongue, can you just grab them and pull them back in? Nope. Once they leave, once it's said, it's done. Let's go to the next visual there. Now, it says, we can say we are sorry, but can we really ever smooth it out? All right? Now, I want you to think of this. Take a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, like typing paper. That blank piece of paper, that smooth piece of paper is somebody's feelings before you say or do something when you're angry. Okay? There's nothing wrong. It's nice and smooth. It's fine. After the bullet leaves the chamber, so to speak, after the words come off your tongue that are cruel or harsh, mean, spirited, angry, lashing out, the middle picture, the crumpled up paper, is the words you just spoke, and it's the person's feelings. You just crushed them. You crushed them with what you said. Now, so you say you're sorry, right? That should be the end of it, right? You said you're sorry again and again, probably. You've probably done it more than once. You might not have done it more than once, but let's say you even do it just once. You call someone some kind of name when you're angry, or you say something to your child like, "I would you were never born," or something like that. Anything that's like that could be hurtful to somebody. You can say you're sorry, but in the long term, you see that third piece of paper? Have you ever tried to take a crumpled up piece of paper and try to smooth it out to its original? Can you get it back to that original condition there on the left? You can't do it. I don't care how hard you try. So in the long term, there's still going to be the wrinkles. There's still going to be, you're never really going to be able to smooth it out because they're never really going to be able to forget what you said. Even though they can forgive you, I know people say forgive and forget. Well, it's not that simple. People still carry things. They might be able to forgive you, and eventually they might not remember, but that doesn't mean they might not remember. Something might dredge up that memory, and it might pop up in their mind at some point, but they might actually forget after a long time that you said that or you did that. But it might come back up again, because remember, once it's said, once it's downloaded into our subconscious mind, do we ever forget it? I mean, we can pull it up it can come back up at any time. Okay, so that's why we should never say it in the first place, so we don't have to worry about it coming up. Okay, so I think that pretty much illustrates the importance of, learning to control our anger, because it can cause that harm that cannot be repaired. So let's go back to page LP3D and look at our next step in lesson number 3 on control your anger. It says, instruct students to turn to page 61 and read the question of the day. Tell students that everyone has anger triggers. Although these triggers can vary from person to person, some are more common than others. Have students read and discuss the sections entitled Feeling a Little Insecure, Jumping to Conclusions, and Work It Out, Don't Fight It Out, found on page 61 through 63. Remind students that anger never resolves conflicts. What's something else you could say in place of anger never resolves conflicts? 2 wrongs don't make a right, right? Those are simple words, but those stick. Those words stick. Anger is never going to resolve the problem. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Getting upset, throwing things, screaming, kicking is not going to solve the problem, okay? It takes practice to remember that. It takes practice to do this. Remember, it's a skill. How long do you have to practice? Think about this for a minute. Chris, I think, was the one that talked about practicing medicine. Might have been Catan. I don't remember which one offhand, but somebody might have even been David, talked about practicing medicine. Doctors practice medicine. What does that mean? That means they're perfect? No, they're practicing. And guess what? You're the guinea pig. Yeah, they're practicing. Okay? That means it's something they habitually do, but it's a practice. It's a discipline, in other words. It's something you have to do again and again and again. All right? Well, there's other practices too. There's many practices out there that people practice, many disciplines or many jobs that people practice. And, Are you ever perfect at anything that you, like if you're a car, if you're let's say you're a mechanic. I'm looking at a mechanic right now. Are you perfect? Are you a perfect mechanic? You are? Oh, okay. No, he's not. He's not proud. He's got rid of the pride. Great. You still learn things, right? We still learn all the time. In fact, they have continuing education in most, jobs I've ever been in. They used to send us to conferences or workshops to learn more about what we were doing. I remember I was doing Medicare billing, and that was something you had to constantly go and learn the new codes that were coming out, that Medicare was putting out. You had to learn all the new billing information, that the new billing rules for billing all these different products. It was a constant learning process because rules changed all the time. Okay, so it's not like we're never going to know everything about anything that we do. It's going to be a constant learning process. Well, guess what? Anger management, it's a skill that we have to practice your whole life. Okay? It's not something you can ever let your guard down on either and think, I got this now. I got this. I don't ever get angry. Okay. Well, guess what? The minute you say that, guess what's going to take place? Someone's going to step on your toes or push your buttons. So watch out. Okay, so remember, remind those students that anger never resolves conflicts. Let's go over to page 61 and read the question of the day. Why do we get angry? We often get angry because we experience something that is unpleasant or our expectations are not or were not met. All right, that should remind us, ding, 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 ding. A little bell should be going off in our mind there. Well, we just read that our expectations were not met, What's that called when your expectations are not met? What emotion are you feeling at that moment? Well, let's go back to page 31 real quick. Let's flip back there because remember, we got to define, we need to get these emotions. We have to be able to identify that first primary emotion so we can learn how to deal with it properly so it doesn't lead to anger. So let's look at page 31 and look at disappointment. Disappointment means to fail to satisfy the hope, desire, or expectation of. So you feel that your expectations were not met. That means that you feel disappointed. Okay, you're disappointed because something didn't occur the way you wanted it to. You didn't get what you want. Okay. Remember what we learned at the beginning of this chapter about a toddler having a tantrum because they're not getting what they want, and they resort to falling on the floor, flopping around, screaming and kicking and crying because they didn't get what they want. And it said, generally, we move past that stage. Generally, it says. Does that mean all people don't have tantrums when they get to be 30 or 40 or 50? I've seen grown people have tantrums. Now, they didn't fall on the floor and start, kicking and screaming like a little baby. But boy, they started kicking and screaming like a little baby when they were kicking the doors. I remember when I was in prison, if a guard didn't give somebody what they wanted, they would start kicking their door as hard as they could, cursing out the guard, yelling and screaming, "Give me my you-know-what toilet paper!" or whatever they wanted. Okay? They resorted to throwing a tantrum. Okay? So don't think adults can't throw tantrums. We do sometimes. And sometimes it might not be the kicking and screaming, that it might not be that, might not manifest itself that way, but it can manifest itself in other ways too. Giving someone the silent treatment or, whatever else we do to get even with them because we didn't get what we want. Okay, so we often get angry, remember, because we experience something that's unpleasant. It didn't set well with us. or our expectations are not met. People get angry for many reasons, and these reasons are called triggers. And from the previous chapter, we learned that a trigger causes something to take place or something to occur. An anger trigger could be something that provokes, frustrates, or aggravates us. Can we put up the next visual? All right, let's look at that word provoke. And I want you to write this in your book because I want you to understand what the word provoke means. Provoke, it means to stimulate or give rise to a reaction or emotion, typically a strong or unwelcome one, in someone. Let me read that one more time. It means to give rise to a reaction or emotion, typically a strong or unwelcome one, in someone. Some of the synonyms for the word provoke are inspire. We can inspire someone to have this condition of being provoked. We can spark it off. We can set off a spark by something we say or do. We can kindle, okay? We can kindle this irritation in somebody, this frustration. Remember, we don't make anyone angry, right? Let's get this straight. We're not getting anyone angry. Do we get anyone angry by what we say or do? No, but we can provoke a person by what we say or do. We can provoke them. We can spark something in them. We can trigger something in them. Because you notice here, trigger is another word that's a synonym for provoke. Trigger. We can trigger something in someone like frustration, annoyance, embarrassment, fear. We can incite that. Now, remember, we're not inciting anger. It's their choice to become angry about what we do or what we say. It's their choice. It's everyone's choice. But we can provoke someone by what we do or say. Let's go back to the book. I want to read these other ones. It says, an anger trigger could be something that provokes, frustrates, or aggravates us. That word frustrate, go back to page 31 again, because again, this is an emotion. It's an emotion. Let's learn about frustration. Let's look at it again. Frustration. Page 31. Frustration says, dissatisfaction that comes from unresolved problems or unfulfilled needs. Unresolved problems or unfulfilled needs. Okay? That's what frustration comes from. All right? And then go back to page 61 again. It says, an anger trigger could be something that provokes, frustrates, or aggravates us. Again, go back to page 31. The very first negative emotion you see there is aggravation. Okay? Aggravation means to intensify unpleasantly, to rouse to displeasure or anger by persistent irritation. But notice, we can provoke or we can incite or inflame or kindle or trigger or instigate someone to feel a certain emotion by our actions, but we do not, it's their choice at that point whether they become, what they do with what took place. It's all of our choice, okay? But we need to be careful. We shouldn't be thinking, well, it's, I can go around inciting people and stirring them up and sparking things in them because, hey, after all, it's their choice whether they become upset about what I just did. So I'll just go around frustrating it, trying to frustrate people or do things to try and instigate problems, right? Should we do that? It's not the peaceful solution, right? We should be trying to make everyone's day pleasant, have pleasant interactions with each other, peaceful relations, right? Not going around stirring up trouble, right? Now, sometimes we have to face problems. Sometimes we do have conflicts, right? Conflicts or disagreements arise, don't they? this is the world we live in. We sometimes we don't agree. We don't see eye to eye. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having a disagreement, but it's how we handle the disagreement that's going to determine whether we handle it morally or immorally, whether we do right or whether we do wrong. Remember, right and wrong. What's the difference between right and wrong? Right means it doesn't bring any harm to someone with words or any other way. If it's right, it doesn't bring harm to you, your neighbor, the environment. If it's wrong, it's immoral, and it causes harm. It causes some kind of harm to come to somebody, whether it's physical harm, emotional harm, etc. Okay, so, all right, back to the reading here. Let's go back to page 61. Okay, it says, a trigger could be a person, situation, or experience. On other occasions, it is our own false perceptions that trigger our anger. Remember what I said about we might think in our mind, we might imagine something's taking place, or we might even see, here's the thing, you might even see something visually that you think is taking place, but what you see is what, it's like an optical illusion. It's not really what you think it is. And I don't like keep using that, story about the boy in the water fountain. We haven't even got to that yet, I don't think. But nonetheless, sometimes it's imagined wrong or imagined disrespect that we're feeling. It's not really real. We think someone's talking about us. We think someone's doing something against us, but they're really not. And actually, go to the next visual. It's really all in your mind, It's how you perceive things. It's just all in your mind. You see that picture? It's kind of like an optical illusion, it just looks like a tree out in the middle of the field, but it's really a face, right, with a brain in the top there, right? Sometimes it's not what it appears to be. So let me continue to read here. It says, because we are all unique individuals, what provokes one person might not necessarily provoke another. However, it is fair to say that many people experience similar triggers or anger traps. Anger traps. Underline that. Anger traps. You know why they call it an anger trap? Because there's times when we actually get trapped by our own thinking, our own attitude, our own choice. We fall into a trap. We fall into becoming angry. Okay, we fall into it. We fall for it, basically. It's kind of like what we'll learn about later on in the respect unit about, the trap of disrespect. We think that because somebody disrespects us, we have to disrespect them in return. After all, I can't let him punk me off like that. I got to let him know, I didn't like what he just said because everyone's watching. Well, everyone's watching. Everybody heard him say something to you that was what? What do you feel when somebody calls you something in front of a classroom full of children? How do you feel? Do you feel angry right then? What do you feel? You feel embarrassed. You're embarrassed because everyone's looking at you like, ooh, remember that? Ooh. People have been raised on soap operas, okay? They want to see some action. They've been watching WWF, and when they see somebody say something to somebody, they're thinking, man, all right, we're going to see some blood here. We're going to see something take place. So, usually, the first thought in their mind is like, you hear the whole class will be like, ooh, you going to let them say that? Ooh. They're trying to provoke. They're trying to spark. The spark's already there. They're trying to ignite the fire now, But once in a while, there'll be a peaceful solution student around, hanging out, and they'll say, they'll come up and say, hey, man, don't worry about it. It's not worth it. Just let it go. And sometimes that's all it takes, huh? Just one person to calm you down, you know, to say, hey man, don't worry about it. You know, it's not worth it. Don't worry about what he said. You know, don't do it, man. It's not worth it. Just that one person can make a difference. Where everybody else is, ooh, you know, that one person can actually calm you down and help you to calm down. That's what we need more of in the world, is people that are, you know, hey man, it's not worth it. Don't worry. You know, don't fighting back. It never works. Becoming angry about it, it's not going to solve it. There's other ways we can handle this. You know, don't do it. That's what we need in the world. We need people like that. Okay, so, all right. Let's see. Okay, so it's our own false perceptions that trigger our anger. Okay, and anger traps. Okay, in other words, once you choose to be angry, a particular trigger can consistently evoke angry feelings. We get into this rut where every time someone does or says a certain thing, we think that we have to let it go to anger and then get angry and then do the same thing we've been doing every time, yelling, screaming, let it turn to rage, you know, by yelling and screaming or whatever, or doing things to get even with that person when we become angry, like, you know, ignore them or, you know, or attack or, you know, whatever else we're going to learn later on, these different, you know, ways we can handle anger. It's a trap, you know, because sometimes we fall into it and we just don't know how to get out of it. You know, like we just keep doing it over and over again because we don't have anybody to teach us, you know, the peaceful solution. Well, guess what? We have someone that's teaching us, so we're aware of these things. We're aware, but you think the world in general is aware of this? For the most part, no. That's why they keep falling into wars. You know, they keep falling into war. You know, they keep thinking, well, war, you know, we got to go to war. We have to go to war, you know, because that nation just violated our airspace, you know. They just flew right into a no-fly zone. So we got to go over there and we got to, you know, we got to handle this, you know. What? You're saying that you don't know how to solve a conflict peacefully? You can't think things through where no one gets hurt? You know, you can't think it through. You can't work it out. You have to fight it out. Well, some people think that that's their only resort. I've heard people say, hey, look, you can only push me so far. You know, there's a red line. I think Chris talked about the red line. Might have been Catan. Could have been David. Hey, remember what Chris said last time? You know, it's all one class, right? It's all just one class. This is one long year, 3 year, however long this is going to take. It's just one class. We're all working together, and it's all the information you've been learning. It's all like one big. We're all working together, and it's just like one big class. So sometimes I don't remember. Was it Chris? Was it Catan? Was it David? Was it me? It might have been me. I might have said it. But the red line. We can't have a red line. There's no red line with a peaceful solution. You can't say you can only push me so far. If you're a peaceful solution practitioner, if that's your practice, which it is, remember, it's a skill we're learning here, right? This is a skill. You're actually, and you know what? How much do you think this would cost to learn? If you had to go, if they offered this in college, let's say that the peaceful solution gives it for free. But let's say you had to learn this skill you're learning right here. You had to go to a college somewhere to learn this skill you're learning here. How much do you think you'd have to pay to be accredited or get a degree in the skill of diplomacy and anger management and, you know, all you're learning in this program? How much do you think it's worth? How much do you think they would charge? Yeah, they'd probably charge you $50,000, $100,000, probably more. Don't take this lightly. You know why? Guess what? We got diplomats everywhere in the world, and they don't know how to do this. You know how I know? There's wars raging all over the planet. There's wars raging. They can't stop them. They don't know how to stop them. They don't even know the first thing about, hey, wait a minute. We can work it out. We don't have to fight it out. There's a way that we can solve all of our problems without going to war and fight and trespass on. You know, most of these wars are only started because somebody's doing something to violate the simplest thing in the peaceful solution, like going into someone else's land, violating a person's boundaries, whether it's their airspace, their waterways, their land, stealing their resources, whether it be oil, diamonds, whatever it is they want. People are just they're just simply violating the simplest principles that we learned in the elementary series of the peaceful solution. You know, not asking permission, just going and doing whatever we want to do because we feel like, you know, well, we got bigger weapons, so you better give us what we want, right? It's like a bunch of bullies on a schoolyard is all it is. It's like children that never, it's like children in suits. Right? Big children in suits. Because, and I'm not putting them down, I'm saying they're big children in suits because they're still children that haven't learned the simplest things in the peaceful solution. Because if they did, they would know how to solve these things with no problem. The great thing is you're going to teach them, right? Okay, so it says, all right, now let me see. Okay, I'm okay. So let's look at this first reason why we get angry about feeling a little insecure. Don't take everything so personally. It says a common anger trigger lies in taking the random comments and actions of others as if they were intended to be personal. Like I told you earlier about someone cutting you off in traffic, you think he did that on purpose because he don't like me, or he don't like the way I look, or my car, or he's trying to show off his car, or whatever you're thinking that he's doing or she's doing. This stems from your own insecurities and issues involving self-worth. Insecurities are those areas in our lives where we lack the confidence and inner strength to be sure and certain about what we know and believe. Hey, look, if you really firmly believe in something, is it going to matter what anybody says about that? Are you going to let it bother you? If you really believe in something, are you going to let it bother you? The only reason we would is we don't firmly believe in what we think we believe. If we let it bother us what other people say about what we believe, we don't firmly believe it. It says insecurities can come in many different forms. Some people are insecure about making decisions or standing up for what they know to be true. Other people are insecure about what they like and dislike. And still there are those who are insecure about their ability to form strong, lasting friendships. Hence, they are very sensitive about what their friends say to them and about them. And it gives the example that your friend comments on how much she dislikes watching comedies. You, however, like watching comedies. An insecure response would be to think that your friend is implying that she doesn't like your taste in movies, or that she's trying to tell you that she does not like you. A secure person would understand that if someone does not like something you like, it doesn't mean they dislike you. Everyone is different and has his or her own likes and dislikes. We learned about that in the character unit, right? What's that called? Our own likes and dislikes. It's personality, right? Everybody has a different personality. That's okay. That's what makes the world interesting, you know? Remember the spices, you know? There's thousands of spices in the rainforest. I think there's something like 3,000 spices out of the rainforest alone. And you could have chicken every night of the week for months and years and never even know it's chicken if you spiced it right. You would never complain about it because if they use different spices on it, it would always taste different and great. You only use salt and pepper, you're going to get pretty bored with it after a while. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so page 62. Another common another common reason people get angry is this jump into conclusions. It says insecurities can also lead to jumping to conclusions. Jumping to conclusions simply means arriving at a false belief due to a lack of accurate, truthful information. Or in other words, true facts. Not false facts, true facts. Arriving at a false belief. If you've ever seen an optical illusion, then you're familiar with how easy it is for us to be tricked by what we see. Like I showed you that picture. Let me show you another picture. Can you put up the next visual? Okay, stare into the screen. See it moving? It's moving, right? Does it look like it's moving? It's not really moving. It's not moving. It's an optical illusion. It's a trick of light and color. Okay? It's not really moving. It just looks like it's moving. Don't stare too long. You'll fall asleep. Oh, actually, go ahead. Just keep looking into it. You are becoming very, very peaceful. You're going to follow the peaceful solution forever. Keep staring into it. Listen to me. Okay. Stop looking at it because you might actually fall asleep. I don't know. Let's go to the next visual, next optical illusion. Let's look at these optical illusions here. Is that guy eating the moon? Or is he eating soup and the moon got in the way? I mean, it sure looks like he's eating the moon. Or at least the moon is dropping into his spoon as he's eating soup. Or what about, is that guy looking straight ahead or is he looking left? Or right, I mean. Is he looking right or is he looking straight ahead? You see how your eyes can be tricked, right? It's called deceit. It's called being deceived. It's called trick. It's called a trick. It's deceived. You're deceiving. Your eyes are being deceived. Okay? You think you're seeing something, but you're not really seeing what you think you're seeing. And that's what this is trying to describe to us. Now it says, an optical illusion appears to be one thing at first glance, but upon closer inspection, it's actually misleading. In order to control your anger, it's very important to keep things in perspective. Sometimes what you choose to be angry about might not be what it appears to be. Now, I want you to underline this next sentence. We sometimes make assumptions based on insecurities about what we see and hear. Go to the last visual we have for tonight. I want you to write this down about the word assumption, okay? The word assumption means a thing that is accepted as true or as certain to happen or occur without proof. Okay? Read it again. A thing that is accepted as true or as certain to happen or occur without any proof. You have no proof of it. You're just assuming because you never really asked or you never really investigated and got remember about that character trait? What's it called? Educated? Getting all the facts, making sure those facts are correct before making a decision about something. A lot of times we jump to conclusions and we assume things, but we don't ask. And ask was one of the first things we learned in the peaceful solution, right? In the kindergarten, in the kindergarten K1 unit, also in the, I believe the unit before that, the pre-K, or the pre-K unit, we learned about asking, the importance of asking. So it says, for example, you see two of your friends at the water fountain. They're talking and laughing while looking in your direction. You think they're talking about and laughing at you, so you ignore them for the rest of the day. If you had taken the time to gather the facts, you would have found out that they were laughing at a funny poster that was tacked to the wall directly behind you. Hey, would there be anything wrong with asking, excuse me, guys, is it my hair or, my dress funny today? Or you guys laughing at me? Nothing wrong with asking, as long as you do it in a polite way, You might find out that, well, no, we're not laughing at you. Like they said here, there's this poster right here. You just kind of got in our way when we were looking in your direction because the poster's right there. That's called jumping to conclusions. And a lot of times we get angry because we allow ourselves to become angry. We make the choice to become angry because we jump to conclusions about what we think we see or hear, etc. We judge by sight and hearing without really investigating anything. You can't do that. We can't do that as peaceful solutions students. We might be seeing something that's not really what we think. We might even hear something that's not what we really think it is. We got to be careful not to fall into that trap. So that's all the time we have for tonight. Okay. The next class is going to be 413 at 5:30 p.m. That'll be on Wednesday, 5:30 p.m. Central Time. You've been an awesome class tonight. I hope I didn't, put you to sleep with that visual there. I just hope I hope it worked what I said about the peace, right? Be peaceful to each other, and we'll see you next class.